On this day of discovery, journey through the streets of Jerusalem with Dr. Michael Rydelnik. Raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, today he follows Yeshua, Jesus, as the Messiah of Israel, and now more than ever longs for the peace of Jerusalem.
Sadly, the city of peace has become a city of tears, but it also is a city of hope. Let's take a walk through time together. We'll see the centrality of Jerusalem to the Jewish people and to the world. Also, we'll experience her sufferings throughout history, and then reflect on the glorious future Jerusalem has as seen in the predictions of the Bible. Jerusalem, a city of tears, a city of hope. I was raised to love Jerusalem. Just the name, Yerushalayim, we spoke it with reverence in my household. And then when I was 10 years old, the Six-Day War broke out, and we won, amazingly. And Jewish people were able to pray in the old city of Jerusalem at the Western Wall for the very first time in 19 years. Very shortly after that, my parents sent me to Israel for the first time, just so I could see Jerusalem. It was so exciting because I had heard this was the place where the Beit HaMikdash was, the Holy Temple. And here I was in the gates of Jerusalem. Right here, this is the Jaffa Gate. There are all these gates around Jerusalem where we can come and look at the glory of this old city. I love coming here. And it has been the heart of every Jewish person to think of Jerusalem. The whole world loves Jerusalem. When you think about it, there's the Muslims who see it as a sacred city, and Christians take it as a sacred city. But Jewish people, it's so special. Well, the reason for that is the Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Judah. And also, it says, Jerusalem, the city in which I have chosen for myself to put my name. What a place. It is God's city. It's the ancient capital of Israel. It's the present capital of Israel. It's the place that God said all the nations would gather one day. It is the center of all of the scriptures. When we think about the past, God chose this place, and He has chosen in the future to reign from this place. This is why Jerusalem is so significant to me, and why it's so central to the scriptures. Jerusalem, the city of peace, has been anything but. 32 nations have conquered this city from ancient times onward. Whether we're talking about the Babylonians coming, destroying the whole city, destroying the temple, the Romans leaving it in rubble, destroying the temple a second time, or Crusaders, Muslims, Mamluks, you name it, they've come here and there have been wars. Even in modern times, this city was a flashpoint in the War of Independence in 1948. And the Jewish quarter was cast out of the city. And then, of course, 1967, the Six-Day War. This has been a city of tears with war and death and sorrow. The rabbis recognize this despite it being a beautiful city. In the Talmud it says, when God created the world, 10 measures of beauty descended on the world. 9 were taken by Jerusalem, and 1 by the rest of the world. 10 measures of knowledge descended upon the world. 9 were taken by Jerusalem, and 1 by the rest of the world. 10 measures of suffering descended to the world. 9 were taken by Jerusalem, and 1 by the rest of the world. This has been a city of tears, a city of suffering, a city of sorrow. This is the Mount of Olives, where people from all over the world and all over Israel come to see one of the most glorious views of Jerusalem, with the golden dome of the rock at the center on the Temple Mount and the entire city laid out before it. It's breathtaking. But what's most amazing is that 4,000 years ago, God told Abraham, take your son, Isaac, your only son, whom you love, and bring him to Mount Moriah, and there offer him as a sacrifice to me. Oh, what a test of Abraham's faith. I don't think I really grasped this. I read that many, many times. But then, about 26 years ago, my wife and I had our first son, and I was holding him in my arms as I read the scriptures, and I was struck about how painful that must have been, even more for Abraham than even for me. But I couldn't do that. How could I give up my son? And there Abraham willingly went to Mount Moriah, and he offered his son, bound him. And only at the last moment, when God sent an angel to stop him, was Abraham willing. He was always willing to answer God, because he knew what God would do. He said to his servants early on, I and my son will return to you. He thought, according to the book of Hebrews, that God would even raise his son from the dead. David becomes king. Where will his capital be? Well, he comes from the south and he decides he's going to take the city of David, actually the fortress of the Jebusites. And the Jebusite king said, even the lame and the blind will be able to keep you out, David, because no one can take this fortress city. David, seeing the city on the mountain, decides, this is the way I'll get in. I'll go through the waterway. And he goes through the spring of Gihon and captures the city. People didn't think he could do it, but he did. And then he makes this his capital. And he builds a palace, and he rules over all Israel. Now, excavations here have found a huge house at the top of the city of David. And it's at the top of the city. It's from 1000 BC. Some have concluded that this perhaps is the very palace that David built. We can see the walls of Jerusalem, the walls of the city of David that he built to protect the city. And from here, David reigned as king over all Israel. This is the excavation at the top of David's city. The city of David has been excavated. It's one of the most exciting excavations in Israel. And it's an active excavation. There are people still coming through. There are tourists. There's archaeologists working around here. Everyone's here because they want to see this really exciting excavation. What you find around here is a remarkable discovery that archaeologist Eilat Mazar has pointed out. As she dug around here, and she found the walls of a foundation of a house from about 1000 BC. She knew it was 1000 BC because of the pottery that she found. Dates it at around 1000 BC. She also looked at the size of the excavation, and she said, this is bigger than any normal house that you find in Israel from that period. And it's at the top of the city of David. She put those facts together, the size of the house, the location of the house at the top of the city, and the pottery, 1000 BC, and she concludes that this must be David's palace. The timing is right, the size is right, the location is right. And so right here, David built his palace. That's what he did, and then made this the capital city of the Israelite nation. So David took the Jebusite stronghold, he built walls for the city and made it impregnable. The city of David was strong, but why the city of David? Well, in Deuteronomy 12, God had told Israel that he would choose the place where they were to come and worship him, where they would offer sacrifices. David knew the place. It was the place where Abraham had sacrificed Isaac, or bound Isaac, and almost sacrificed him. And so David takes the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, and that's where he wants to build the temple. It's perfect, right above the city of David, even above his own palace. The only problem was the Lord said, no, David, you're a man of bloodshed, and you can't do it. David wanted to, couldn't do it, and so it was left to his son. David did everything he could to prepare his son, helped administer, raised the money for it, but he himself could not do it. So he builds on this, or Solomon then takes it upon himself, because of his commission from his father, to build the temple. And he does it there. One of the most glorious prayers is at the dedication of the temple. The Spirit of God has come, and he says, you know, whatever happens to your people, when they sin, they can come here and offer sacrifice. When they are defeated in war, they can come and petition. Whatever their needs are, this is the place that they will meet God. And then he even says, it is not just for my people Israel. When a foreigner will come, he will hear about the great works of God, and he will come here and bring his petition. And Solomon says, hear their prayers, listen to them, so that your name would be glorified. This is the place where God intended Israel and all the nations to meet him in his presence. God had promised that he would make his name to dwell in the place that he selected for worship. And this was the place, Mount Moriah, where Solomon had built his temple. But it wasn't just that. When the priests came and offered their sacrifices, when they were finished, as they were finishing, it says that the priests came out of the holy place and the cloud filled the Lord's temple. And because of the cloud, the priests were not able to continue ministering, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Then Solomon said, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness, but I have indeed built an exalted temple for you, a place for your dwelling forever. The point is, it is the very Spirit of God, the Shekinah glory of God that filled this place. It was a place where Israel would meet God, and he was present there by his very Spirit. So it's a glorious location, but not only that, it was made even more glorious by the presence of God. In 586, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Jerusalem. He destroyed the city, and even more terribly, destroyed the Holy Temple. And so Jewish people were taken en masse as captives to Babylon. And there they longed for Jerusalem. They lamented for Jerusalem. Their great longing was to come back to the city. In fact, one of the Psalms written at that time says, by the waters of Babylon, there we lay down and wept for you, Jerusalem. And one of the verses in that psalm says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its use. May my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I forget you, Jerusalem, if I do not keep Jerusalem as my chief joy. So this became the place where Jewish people longed to return to. It was not just these steps which were destroyed from the Second Temple. It was not just a longing to return to the temple, it was a longing to return to their land, the land of Israel. And so throughout time, as Jewish people have been dispersed abroad, they've always had a longing to return to this place. Every Jewish home leaves a corner undone because there's the hope that one day Jewish people will come back to this place. And so they're not to get our roots too deep into homes in the diaspora, into the exile among the nations. And Jewish people every day pray in the synagogue for a restoration to the land of Israel. And so the longing for Jerusalem never left. It was always there, the deep-seated hope to come back to this city. These are the southern steps of the temple. It's where Jewish people would ascend to go worship the Lord. They would begin by going to one of the ritual baths that are still present here. And they would purify themselves ritually, then ascend the steps to go to the Holy Temple, because it was only those people, Jewish people, who were ritually purified that could go to the holy place and worship. As each one would walk up the steps, they would sing the Psalms of Ascent, Psalm 120 through 35. Psalm 122 says, I rejoiced when they said to me, let us go up to the house of the Lord. And so each psalm would be sung, rejoicing as they entered into the Holy Temple to worship God there. There are many terrific overlooks here in the city of Jerusalem. This is one of my favorites. It's got the Western Wall where Jewish people have been praying for 2,000 years. It's got the Temple Mount, where today there's the Dome of the Rock, but that was the site of the Holy of Holies. It's just a great picture to understand that this was the place where the Second Temple was built, right here behind us. It was a temple that the people desperately wanted, and when they came back from captivity, it was built, and the people wept because it wasn't as glorious as Solomon's temple. And then Herod decided to enlarge that temple and make it more glorious, make it greater, so that he could fill it with the greatness that he thought the Holy Temple in Jerusalem deserved. And it really was one of the great structures of the world. It was the largest structure in the world. It was amazing. It was one of the wonders of the world. Yet, that was not what made this Second Temple glorious. In the book of Haggai, it says that the Lord would fill this place with glory. And he said this to the captives who had returned, and they were so distressed about how inadequate their temple was. He says, I will fill this temple with glory. And the way he would do it, he said, I will make the desire of all the nations come to this. And that was fulfilled when the Lord Jesus himself came to this temple and filled it with his presence and his glory. One of the ways we can see the centrality of Jerusalem is in the triumphal entry of the Messiah. On the Sunday before the crucifixion, Jesus had his disciples bring him a donkey, a foal, and he rode it down a path much like this from the Mount of Olives. And as he came down towards Jerusalem, the crowds gathered along the path, and they shouted, Hosanna, Hosanna to the King, save now. This is in fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9, which says, Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion, for your king comes to you, humble and riding on a donkey. Amazingly, this is the very day that the Passover lambs would have been presented at the temple to see if they were acceptable sacrifices. On that very same day, the Messiah King comes down this path and presents himself to Israel to see whether or not he is an acceptable offering for them. When I came to this place for the first time, as a 10-year-old boy, we could walk over to that arch right over there, Robinson's Arch, and touch it. It was ground level. It's hard to believe, but we had really no idea what was underneath the ground. And of course, archaeologists came and they excavated this area, and what they discovered was a first-century street, a street that ran alongside the western wall of the temple. The arch actually led to a stairway that came down, and people would walk under the arch, and of course, people would enter into the temple, going up those stairs into the temple. And this very first century street was where people would walk and have commerce and get around in the city of Jerusalem as they went to the temple. Now, what you see is the destruction that the Romans brought on the 9th of Av in the year 70. The Romans came to this place after besieging it. The General Titus came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem. He burned it with fire, and he destroyed the temple. The temple was completely devastated, and the Romans took these rocks right over here and tossed them down from the wall. And you can see the destruction that it wrought on the very streets that it fell upon. And these are left here as a reminder of what happened. Now, all this happened because Jesus had foretold it. In Luke chapter 19, in verse 43, Jesus said, The days will come on you when your enemies will surround you on every side. They will crush you and your children within you to the ground. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. What Jesus is saying is that the Romans would come and destroy this place. The destruction would be complete of the temple. There would be no stones left. And the reason was Jewish people had failed to recognize the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. And as a result, the discipline for that failure to see him, to recognize him, to believe in him, would be the destruction of the Holy Temple. Right here, we can see the remains of Jesus' prediction. If you come to Jerusalem, to the Davidson Center, named for the man who gave the money for the excavation here. You'll see the first century Roman street. You can see Robinson's Arch. One of the more significant things that you can find here is this inscription. This is a replica of the inscription that was found here. It was a Hebrew inscription from the first century, which says, "To the place of the trumpeting two." And it was at this stone, which was on top of the wall in the first century, that the first siren system announcing the Sabbath was there. Men would go with the trumpet and they would stand there and they would blow the trumpet to let the whole city know that Sabbath had begun and that Sabbath law now would take effect and people were to rest from then on for 24 hours. And so this is the place that would announce the beginning of the Sabbath. We're in the ancient Cardo, the marketplace of Jerusalem. It was built by Hadrian after 135 when he conquered Jerusalem. It's a good place to talk about the suffering of Jerusalem in the ancient world. Of course, we know the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70 and destroyed the temple and took 100,000 Jews as slaves to Rome. They also killed up to 1 million people. There's a great deal of bitterness. And then a generation later, in the year 132, when Hadrian imposed anti-Jewish laws, there was another Jewish revolt. And this time Hadrian came, conquered the city, destroyed its Jewish presence, and also renamed it Aelia Capitolina. He forbade Jews from ever entering the city. A couple centuries later, Constantine made Christianity the state religion, and Jerusalem became a Byzantine city. The Byzantines allowed Jews to return here to pray, but they continued to oppress them. Jewish people longed for their return to their land so they could pray in Jerusalem and worship God here. Here we are in the Muristan. It's in the center of the Christian quarter of Jerusalem. It's a place where east meets west. We can see the meeting place between the minaret to my right, the Church of the Redeemer to my left, and even the Church of the Holy Sepulchre behind us. It's a place that reflects the suffering of Jerusalem in the medieval period. You see, in the Middle Ages, the Turks came here in the 7th century and they conquered Jerusalem and they established Islam as the predominant faith. They built the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, and they also built a mosque on the site of the Holy Sepulchre Church. This is what caused later on the Crusaders to want to liberate this city, and they came and they conquered the city. And in so doing, they murdered both Jews and Muslims living in the city. One of the most tragic events that took place was that the Crusaders took all the Jews in a synagogue and burned them alive and marched around that synagogue singing, "Christ, we adore thee." Of course, there was a Muslim reconquest, which again established Islam as the dominant faith. And this continued up until the Turkish domination of this area. It's a place of suffering and sorrow for not just Jewish people, but for Muslims and Christians, Jews, as they all have been fighting over this city. I hope you've enjoyed this walk through Jerusalem, this walk through time. We've seen the centrality of Jerusalem and the suffering of Jerusalem. But there's another walk that we still need to take. That's a walk through the future, as we see what the Bible predicts about the future of this city, when the Messiah will come and reign and establish his rule through the city of the great King.